Hi, everybody. This is Jim Cornette, pro wrestling legend, and you're listening to the Book in the Territory Unprofessional Wrestling Podcast.
This is the artist formerly known as Daryl Van Horn, James Mitchell, the Sinister Minister, and I'm here to let you know I would rather slam my cock in a car door than to miss the dulcet tones of Hard Body Harper, my illegitimate son, on Booking the Territory podcast.
Woo, Messi, this is professional wrestler Jimmy Valiant, the Boogie Woogie Man. Tell my people, my brothers and sisters, don't you dare miss Booking the Territory. Oh, yeah.
This is a one-man gang. You're listening to Booking the Territory Pro Wrestling Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to Booking the Territory, the Unprofessional Wrestling Podcast, where today, Bruce Mitchell returns. Bruce, how you doing, man?
Doing fine. Good day. Safe.
I was looking at something on Skype a second ago, and you were last on in September of 2018.
Wow. Look what you did.
Time flies. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yes, it does. You have a good subject to talk about. Yeah.
We do. So you were telling me before the show you've been surviving, you're hanging in there during this pandemic and whatnot, so that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, everybody's safe, everybody's healthy, so I'm happy for that.
I hear you. Let me ask you one thing before we jump into this topic on the Gangstas. Have you found any, given that, I guess, I don't want to say you've had extra time, but given that you've got a little bit different time on your hands, have you delved into anything classic wrestling-wise that you had been wanting to do for a while, or maybe not?
No, I am so happy you asked me that, and here's why, because I can say this. I'm not exactly sure all the places it's coming from, and so I don't want to, not give the person credit for it, but I give whoever it is, I'm giving them a ton of credit. There is a ton of Continental and Southeast from 1980, I think, right from when Ron Fuller took over or started it, all the way through, I think, to 1989, and some of it's cut up and some of it's different places. But you're talking about Ron Fuller and Bob Armstrong and the Rat Patrol and Arn Anderson and Jerry Stubbs and that stuff, and Charlie Platt. I mean, I'm like, as much as it's fun to watch Gordon Soley, it's kind of Gordon Soley down the road a little bit, and Charlie Platt's really good. I've really enjoyed watching a ton of that. And there's been some Crockett from the 80s that hadn't turned up yet, and then there's I always look at it like this: Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Hart. If you can hit that time before Jimmy Hart went to the WWF, I mean, that stuff, and Bill Dundee and all that stuff is a lot of fun to watch. Believe it or not, I look more for promos from those times than I do for classic matches. I look for, and the promos are so good and so much fun, and so much about one guy being mad at another guy and wanting to fight. It's a lot more, instead of this, I should be the face of the promotion, or I should lead the locker room, and all this stuff we hear now. It's just that's my old man rant. I mean, just like, you're paying to see a fight, talk about you want to kick his ass, and that's what they do. So, when I'm looking for comfort food, that continental Southeast stuff from the early 80s is a lot of fun.
That's funny you say that about looking for promos, because Doc and I have talked about this a bunch of times on the shows. We said, it's been 3 or 4 years ago now we first said this, but we were like, we said, can we admit that we actually love, and pardon my French, the shit talking promos more than we actually like the wrestling? Because that's what I do. I go back, and when I'm looking at old stuff, I look at the promos. that's my big thing. Like, I want to go through the promos. I want somebody like Arn Anderson always used to do, just to look into that camera and look into my soul and explain to me why he's going to kick this guy's ass. And that's what I always go for.
Or lie to me. He was so good at taking something that was true and just twisting it a little bit into a lie and telling the story with it. I mean, and like, he's going to kick this guy's ass, and you knew the guy was going to kick his ass, but he, and Arn was our guy, and it was, right. It was a bucket list thing to do the first live Arn Anderson thing and take Conrad Thompson's place. I mean, that was a lot of, Arn was our guy, and for those promos and all that. Like, but there's yeah, I mean, there's a ton. I was a promo guy before I was a wrestling guy, because you would watch the shows to watch the promos. The good matches you'd have to go pay to see. And then I was, I come from late 70s Mid-Atlantic, which was a bunch of talent. And it was, they drew the money by the promos. And that's where it is. I think the wrestlers today are better and more athletic, and I know there's a lot, and I'm not going to get into like the complaints, but it's like a lot of it is people complaining they aren't watching, but they really tell stories well physically, but the shit talking, the promos, there's very few that can stand up with an Ernie Ladd, that can stand up with an Arn Anderson, that can stand up with a Ric Flair or Jerry Lawler or Bill Dundee, and there's a lot, and he was corny as all get out, but Bob Armstrong, like, just coming out and being a hero, if you can have the baby faces, then the cheaters can lie. But if everybody's acting the same way, it hurts. But yeah, I mean, I think the promos, I've talked about this a lot in my wrestling job. It's like the promos of this era and the last 20 years aren't anywhere as near what they were. I mean, just for getting people to want, you should be fired up to see the match. That, like, you should be fired up to see that guy, that guy, and not just, oh, that's a funny line or any of that kind of stuff. And they could get away, they could have the funny lines. I always talk about Ole Anderson, and heck, Smoky Mountain Wrestling had a lot of funny lines that were in the right place. They weren't there to be funny first. They were just detail work and trying to get the heat. And it made it, and to me, that's a lot more clever and a lot funnier than just, hey, I'm repeating what I heard on the Tonight Show, or what Jay Leno said, or Jimmy Kimmel, or whoever it is. I'm repeating whatever the cool catchphrase is. It's the and then also, nobody talks for 20 minutes, stands in front of someone they want to fight and talks to them for 20 minutes, and that stuff is so not relatable. But yeah, the promos, instead of like blabbing on like this, I've said this a lot too. My favorite thing in professional wrestling has stayed the same for 40 years. And it's this: localized promos for territories. The guys, Rich Landrum standing there with a microphone, telling where the show is, and then handing it to the good guy, and then 45 minutes handing it to the bad guy, and the wrestlers talking about the club in the town, the good clubs in the town, and where they were going to be, and what happened on the last show, and trying to top each other. Ric Flair versus Roddy Piper doing that. It's one of my favorite things ever. It still is. And the localized promos, and even in the 90s they started losing it, and Smoky Mountain Wrestling brought it back. Smoky Mountain Wrestling had those, and of course, something that Jim Cornette was a master of. But they also had, they had Ron Wright, and they had a bunch of guys that could talk that trash, and yeah, you need that.
You definitely need that. So you're leading me to the reason I wanted to bring you back, because it has been a while. It was September of 2018 last time you were on, and you and I, you probably don't remember this. It's probably been close to a year now.
I think we fought about we fought about New Jack, and
we were going back and forth about about New Jack and the Gangstas. And Bruce, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, and let me state my feelings on it, because on Twitter, a lot of times you can't communicate what you really want to say in long form. It's just, Twitter is just not the place to discuss things you disagree on, things with your friends or anyone about. But in my opinion. But so for me and Doc and Harper, my co-host that I've done the Smoky Mountain show with now for almost 3 years and 9 months as we come to an end of it, is we loved the Gangstas in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And we understand, I think I understand your point. I've heard your points about how, correct me if I'm wrong, like you thought Corny was trying to start a race war and all these different things.
I didn't think Corny was trying to start a race war.
Okay, that's what I say. Correct me, Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay. But I know, I take it, at least, well, let me say it like this. I think you didn't like it, but we loved it because we felt, well, he was trying to do something that, you know, to spark things in his territory. And then let me say one more thing too, from a story Tracy Smothers told me when he was on the show a few years ago. Tracy Smothers and I were talking about when they brought the Gangstas in. And the day the Gangstas debuted in that small gymnasium, Ricky Morton was watching the monitor when the Gangstas went out. And Ricky Morton was like, man, we're about to make some money with this. So even a guy like Ricky Morton, according to Tracy Smothers, was like, man, and wait, I'm saying debut. I can't remember. I can't remember if it was the day they debuted or after.
Fine.
But the point,
when he first saw them, yeah.
When he first saw them, he was like, oh, Jimmy, we're about to make some money with this. So I go back to what I'm saying. I think there was a lot of racially, obviously motivated things in the angle, but we loved it. We thought that, you know, hey, they're trying. There were some crazy promos. I mean, New Jack, we got two less to worry about. I mean, he said some insane things, but we really liked it. We thought it was good TV when New Jack and the Gangstas were in Smoky Mountain for their run. Now, again, I think you differed with our opinion on it, and I wanted to talk to you about it just to kind of understand more why you didn't like it so much, and correct me if I misstated anything.
No, and well, here's the thing. You know, what you're saying is true. Like for you, it's like you liked it, your friends liked it, you enjoyed it. That's all, and that's something I'm not, you know, that I'm not taking away from that at all. I thought it was bad business. And I thought I was in a car and traveling around Smoky Mountain for a week or so around the time of the big Pikeville, Kentucky show when the Rock and Roll Express had their showdown with the Heavenly Bodies, and one of the best shows I ever saw, Loser Leave Town and all that. And for a day or so, I was traveling with Cornette, and he was telling me about this idea for the Gangsters and how there's no such thing as too much heat. And that was what I wrote about. There's such a thing as too much heat. And that was, and what I did, I went to, and I proved it because I thought I was writing something that was so ridiculously racist that it was laughable, but it was also like would make the point there's something that's too much, you know, there's too much heat. And Cornette, it made Cornette furious, and he's been furious with me to this day. And there were parts of it, like I used some of the names of some of the women who worked in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and I checked it out with them. I said, do you think this is funny? And they're like, yeah, okay. They're like, yeah, we love it. And then, you know, when Cornette reacted the way he did, some of them changed their mind, some of them didn't. But here's the thing. It didn't work. Like, I didn't think it would work, and it didn't work. Like, his business went down, and they had, you know, race riot is such a term. Like right now, today as we're recording this, I would say what I would consider race riot is going on right now in Minneapolis. That it's that there are riots going on, and they are motivated by a feeling of people of hopelessness of not having any racial justice and wanting to see some justice and trying to take it out of the legal system where they have no faith and taking it into the street. And, you know, and what it always does to me is damage the very neighborhoods that are being damaged already. But anyway, that's a race riot. I'm not sure what happened in Wise, Virginia was a race riot, but that is what, that was what the law enforcement said. And I think Cornette's even said this, and he never admits to anything wrong. And I think that's, you know, a real bad thing. but he said this not in so many ways. But when you're running it, when you're the owner and you're the promoter and you're also the lead heel, and you're getting enough, and you're Caucasian, and your wrestlers are Caucasian, and you're getting in a fight with some black kids, and there's no rules in a cuss war, and you're calling them the N-word, and what you're going to do is take a bad situation and make it a lot worse. I mean, part of the deal is make your money, keep everybody fairly safe, and get the hell out of Dodge, and come back the next time and make some more money. And if you're not allowed back, and you've left a bad, if you left a bad taste, then you've done bad business. My thing was this was bad business. I also thought that Cornette doing what he did, he set up the Gangstas as these heels, and I bet you didn't hate them. See, part of my point with this stuff was that he was coming into what he thought was, and it was rural areas up in the mountains, and that those kids weren't watching TBS, and they weren't watching USA, and they had satellite television. They had, I'd lived in Beckley not just a few years before that, and I could tell you, it's like, the technology was making the world smaller, and he thought, since they're not promoting all the time, and I'll be promoting here, I'll have a local promotion, and that was, and that was the big mistake, where it wasn't going to be ever seen as major league. And I wish that wasn't true. I like Smoky Mountain Wrestling a lot, and I wish it wasn't true, but you couldn't have whoever is on top in Bret Hart and The Undertaker and whoever in WWE and in WCW, Sting and everybody else, and then headline with the Rock and Roll Express and the Fullers and the Goldens and the guys from years ago in something that seemed like it was minor league, and it was actually a better run in a lot of ways creatively, but it was minor league. And but anyway, Cornette took himself and had And New Jack was a really talented talker. Those guys are bad wrestlers, but they were really talented talkers. Had them say those things that got them in trouble. They got the stations mad at them. They got them all that, and they didn't make more money off it. I understand getting more heat, but more money. But they weren't making more money off it. Then he turned himself babyface, managed the Rock and Roll Express, and to me, talking to him, I thought this is a guy that was tired of hearing Reverend Al Sharpton and wanted to talk back to Reverend Al Sharpton, so he brought in the closest wrestling thing you could have, which was Jerome Young from Greensboro, North Carolina, playing New Jack, and did it, and then did and the crowds went down, and they did that stuff, but he got to make his speeches. Cornette got to make his speeches back, and do that stuff, but it was something that. It damaged the company when it didn't need to be damaged, and he was going for home runs, because the other thing he was doing a lot of was a lot of bait and switch that he'd seen in Memphis, and it worked in Memphis because Memphis had also delivered a ton of times, and Smoky Mountain was still 2 or 3 years old, and it didn't work there, and so he wasn't used to hearing some back from that, and he wasn't happy with that criticism of bait and switch. But I mean, the thing with the Gangstas was that there is a wrong kind of heat. If you're causing people in the crowd to get into fights, if you're causing them to, if you're causing somebody to get so upset they're going to come get the Gangstas and kill them, then, and wrestling's had that type of heat before, and you're not making more money at it, then that can be a problem. You can say things, it's an art to it. And Cornette's been, an artist at it in many ways. He's not now, but in many ways he was really good at going right to the limit and not too far and drawing the money. And then also calming everybody down before they left by, taking the beating, or having Ronnie Garvin, beat his ass after he threw the fire at him, or what he did with Baby Doll. It's, there's an art to it. There's an art to going right up to the edge and not too far. And with the Gangsters, yeah, it was entertaining, but it hurt. I mean, some of what they did, being scared in the graveyard and all that, that's Amos and Andy time. Like they did some of that crap, but the old black people are scared of spooks and that kind of crap, and that's just offensive. But that's where and some of the things they did along that way, it hurt the promotion. And that's where I would say, like, if they thought it was going to be money, maybe they did. And maybe they looked at it and thought it was going to be money, but it wasn't.
You said a couple of things, and just so we don't confuse anyone out there, I know you had brought up West Virginia, and I mentioned the whole race riot thing. That to be fair, that was before the Gangstas, and I did read Wade's report years later.
Before the Gangstas, I get really confused about that. Was that before the Gangstas? I thought it was after.
Yeah.
Maybe it was.
No. It was West Virginia. That happened before the Gangstas, but I want to say something about that because I totally agree with you. I read the report and have read what Corny said about the N-word. Totally disagree with him on that fact. I don't. That it's, in my opinion, it's not even up for debate. He should not have gone there because all it does is incite things a little bit worse. I hear what he said. I read the article. I think he even admitted to saying it. And yeah, I don't agree with that.
He admitted he said it. And he justified it by saying there are no rules in a cuss fight.
Right.
Which he lives his life by, but in that case, there should have been. In that case, it should have been, I'm the owner, I'm the promoter, let's calm this down instead of I'm not backing down.
Right.
That's that kind of stuff. And even wrestlers, it's like there's, if a wrestler causes a fight and then they're banned out, and then the promotion is banned from the building where they made money, that's a bad deal,
Yeah. Well, and in Weiss, like I said, it was before the Gangstas, so I don't want to confuse the listeners to think that happened with the Gangstas.
Confused by that. I'm sorry.
No, Bruce. Believe me, I am the worst. The only reason I remember this so well is Bobby Blaze and I had a long talk about Weiss, Virginia, because he was there, and Bobby totally agrees that word should not have been used, but he also, as someone who was an eyewitness to it all, said it was not a race riot, it just was a wrestling riot. Now, did that word...
I agree with that. That wasn't... And the thing about that term, that's why I said, like, what's going on in Minneapolis right now is one. But that wasn't one. That was a term that law enforcement used and got quoted in the Torch and quoted to Wade as he wrote that.
Right. So it got legs at that point.
But it's like I disagree with it too, because I think there's more to a race riot than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to make that point as we talk about what everything else. Now, the other thing about the Gangstas not working in Smoky. So I actually, when Cornette was either the first or second time, he's been on the show multiple times, either the first or second time he was on with us, we talked to him about the Gangstas, and he actually admitted that it didn't work because the big towns, the Johnson cities, the Knoxvilles, and places like that, it worked. It was okay. But the little towns, he said, it didn't work because the people wouldn't come. They were so upset and so offended by New Jack and Mustafa that they just didn't come. And in the other issue, he talked about
there's too much heat. Yeah,
there was. Yeah, it was literally too much heat.
The wrong kind of heat. Yeah.
It pushed it. Yeah. It pushed the fans away. So I agree with you there. And then he even talked about, like, his buddy Ken Cantrell, who listens to this show. Ken, he was a part of the volunteer fire department, and they walked the Gangstas to the ring as quote unquote security, and they're getting threats because they walk these angry black men to the ring at a few shows. So I totally agree with you there from that point of view. One thing I want to mention, though, when we talk about the Gangstas not working, all of that said, wrestling was also not in a good financial place overall when Smoky was in its heyday. So, I feel it would be unfair and unjust to, leave that point out when we say, well, the Gangstas didn't work. Because to be fair, Smoky didn't work as a whole, but it didn't have anything, in my opinion, to do with the overall booking of the 3 years and 9 months of the promotion. Is that fair to say, in your opinion? Would you agree or disagree?
I would say everything's in context, like everything's of the time and period that it's in, and that was the time and period that it's in, and there's no doubt about it. I would say that there were times when Cornette booking, when I'm talking about these are big things. He would bait and switch too often, but as far as like solid booking, yeah, it was a solidly booked territory. But I know that he wouldn't have brought the Gangstas in. That was that was kind of a home run swing. I mean, I remember talking to him about before he ever did it, and he was like, we need something, and they did, and then also his idea for, and I don't think of Cornette as a behind it until lately. I don't think of until last year or so. I don't think of Cornette anywhere near as like old school, all that, old fashioned stuff. But this was an old-fashioned promotion at a time he didn't realize that everybody, including the people in the hollers, were watching the same television. And that part of it, I think, like he couldn't be Major League Wrestling no matter how good a job he was doing with the booking and how, and how Southern he did in a Southern holler. It was still going to be not Major League. That was, and he had that impossible choice of, do I bring in, the Undertaker or Shawn Michaels? Do I bring in Bill Watts and try to, and guys from WCW and try to poke it there, and they'll think these shows are Major League, but they won't come back to the shows with just your regular crew. I mean, it's so yeah, but I think his booking was solid. I mean, it's like you can go back and watch this stuff, and it tells a story. And the right people are the heels, and the right people are the baby faces, and it makes sense. And it's not, and it's not they start something and they forget about it. So yeah, it was, and I loved how he started the promotion. I mean, he built a foundation. He didn't just start everything on the first show. And so there's a lot that was good with it, but yeah, the Gangstas. I mean, it was, And it was not going, if you're, I think of it like people always praise Kevin Sullivan in Florida, Kevin Sullivan and the Abuda Dean stuff and all that. And I'm like, I get why Mark Lewin coming out of the beach is tremendous. I mean, I get that, as far as a piece of entertainment, but but the business went down. And, Eddie Graham was having problems, and Dusty Rhodes didn't want to stay around, and he was kind of worn out as a top guy and all that. But it caused them to lose, business. People stopped coming. People stopped, they had a harder time booking shows. They had a harder time. They got more complaints on television stations. It hurt their relations with different things because they were, worshiping the devil on TV. And as ridiculous as that sounds, I mean, that's part of it too. It's like, is the risk worth the reward? And to me, the Gangstas and Smoky Mountain turned out not to be, and I didn't think it would be either. I mean, I thought, if you're right, that racial issues are, in America now and back then and back 100 years before that, they are the place that you can, that people's emotions are right on the line, and that is not where you want to be as far as running of performance is so that's what I would say. It's just like, did I think that New Jack cut good promos? Yeah, I did. Did I think that the story made sense? Yeah, I did. Did I think that Jim Cornette turning himself into a hero for the white man to talk back to the Al Sharpton figure? I wasn't crazy about that. I thought that was like self-indulgent, but
see, that's a fair Bruce. I hate to interrupt because you're good, you're great when you're on the roll, but that's a fair point related to the angle. So like when people hear, well, Bruce Mitchell thinks that bringing in the Gangstas or Smoky Mountain Wrestling it was not a good idea, or he didn't like it because of this. Like they don't hear that exact point, and that's exactly why I wanted to bring you on to talk about it, because that part, when you phrase it like that, I agree with you, because he tried to like leverage them in that instance. Now, again, I'm not blaming Corny as much. I mean, he is the booker, but the thing is, like, I understand he was just trying to do what he felt what was best for his promotion at the time. But I see your point when you
Of
say
course.
you didn't like that
Of
part.
Of course he was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'll say this, it's like Cornette, this sounds like just the most simple thing in the world. And Cornette was always, and the most clear thing in the world. Like the whole point of professional wrestling is drawing money to your promotion, like drawing business to your promotion and then making money off of it. It isn't, I hear all this stuff about art and passion and all that. And I'm like, great. You need to work hard at your job. You need to figure out ways to do stuff, but but if you're drawing money, you've got the art because you're building that bond with fans to come, and the fans are if you watch empty arena wrestling, it's like it's missing something because the fans aren't pouring their energy into it. But also it's like that's where the money comes. And so all these other things that you talk about, it's like he did it for the business, and he should, and he did the right things for the business. And in this case, I think he did something that didn't work. But I know I met New Jack. It's funny to me. I had to go to Philadelphia to meet New Jack. But anyway, I met New Jack after he left Smoky Mountain, and before it was, I think, the second time he was at the ECW arena, and I went up there and I spent like 45 minutes talking to him about Smoky Mountain and about ECW, and he kind of saw it the same way in a lot of ways. I remember that, and then of course I haven't seen him since, and a lot of things have changed since then. But it was. I think like that was the and also Cornette was looking for new things to do with the same crew, and the crew was aging out. Stan Lane was wanting to go do something else, and rock and roll. I love them now. I love them then, but it was like they were older then, and it was and then wrestling was struggling too. The major league wrestling was doing a bad job, so he had to fight all of that.
Yeah,
so
he
get why he did it. I get what he was doing, but I think he learned from it too. I think when he went to work in Ohio for Ohio Valley, it's like he started a lot. He did a good job with a lot of talent, and he didn't try to like recreate anything there. He tried to move on, and I think in Ring of Honor he was kind of misunderstood some, but it's like he did some stuff there too. Like he kept up with the wrestling business until just a few years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. He's been ranting as of late on his on the AEW.
I'll put it like this: he kept up with the purpose. Like
I got you.
Now it's like it doesn't matter if they draw money; they suck. I'm going to shoot them. Or like I'm going to do that. Like it didn't work, and like well. Like Kenny Omega ruined his career by wrestling with a sex doll. It's like, okay, I understand that. That was an insult. I get that. But it didn't ruin his career. He headlined Tokyo Dome. He's a top guy now. It's like he's not, it's like, and that's more a personality thing of if you're never wrong, when life proves that you're wrong and you don't learn from it, you just get further and further out on this limb, and he's way out on these limbs now. But he didn't used to be, and he wasn't for a long time. But there was stuff that the Gangstas did, particularly New Jack, that I thought was dead on good promos. But I also think the one what's the one he's most remembered for? I'll ask you that. I'll put it like that.
Well, it's hard to argue against the first one because everybody reflects back to, there's two less of you to worry about. And then, but let me keep going because I remember so many of these. There's the one with the chicken and watermelon too that he cut. So, I mean, like there's a lot to go from when you talk about New Jack, but those two come to mind, and those were some of the first ones.
Yeah, both of them, and the first one, I remember watching. Like I was getting Smoky Mountain tapes, and Casey O'Connor was there, and they had a good source for it, and I remember watching that, going, "Holy crap!" But I also knew the look on Bob Caudle's face, and that Bob Caudle was, not a crazy, like a normal, respectable, mainstream white Republican American, and he wasn't going for that. And like to me, when you have that, when you lose that, it was like, that's going to be like, I thought, boy, that was a lot. That took a lot of balls. And I liked it in that sense. And I laughed because it was just so bad. The murderer, the murderer killed two of y'all. And, and then the whole thing of OJ, who was anything but, a black supremacist. I mean, he like that he was, before that, I grew up with him being the, being the most likable black man in America before he murdered those two. And
yeah, I mean, as a kid, I remember him doing Monday Night Football,
and so I was like, wow, I was laughing at the audacity of it, and but I also thought that's gonna cause you problems, and it did. It's like they lost Cottle over it, and they lost some other things over it, and so as it went along, and if you got. And you've got this atmosphere in small towns and atmosphere of some of the bigger towns too. That was like the wrong kind of thing. If you're marketing to families and they were, I mean, and I'm not a big, like, wrestling should market to families guys. You're marketing fights, but they wanted to have kids come too. And if you create an atmosphere that makes adults scream, kind of squeamish about it, or a little, not so happy, then you're going to lose teenagers, you're going to lose kids, and you're going to lose adults too. And they did.
Real quick, the Bob Cottle thing, according to Cornette, I got this from him when he was on, Bob was just getting older, driving all these towns, for the TV tapings and bringing his wife. And that's why Bob left. It didn't have anything to do with New Jack. That's what I was told. That's the only reason why I mentioned that.
Fair enough. My understanding was that a little bit too, but I think a lot of it had to be like driving from, living in Raleigh and driving to, wherever it is, Tennessee, to do a television taping.
Yeah.
And he was getting older, and he had the job with, was Helm still around at that point? But anyway, he had those jobs. Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. That's
just I wanted to mention that as what I was told. One other thing actually two other things on Smoky, but one another big one. I disagree with you and Wade on him bringing in the big names into Smoky, and just hear me out. I understand where you're coming from when you bring in
and Wade and I might have the same opinion, but the only one I'm going to defend is mine. I mean,
okay. Well, I thought again, in people's minds change over time, but I remember reading a Torch where I think Wade was like, he's bringing in these guys, he's bringing in these big names, and when they leave, then kaput. What do we have now? But my thing was, I totally kind of hear what you all are saying. Like, okay, so you bring these big names in, you bring in a Michaels, you bring in an Undertaker, you bring in Randy Savage, all these guys you bring in, and then when you leave, well, you're just left with these other guys. But at the same time, you're running a business, so you want to try to do anything you can as a business owner to inject a shot of, whether I use the word steroid or inject a shot of power into your promotion. So I didn't think personally that when he brought in these names from these, whether it was WCW or whether it was WWF, I didn't think that in any of those times that his talent was buried. So that's where my opinion differs, to say that I don't think it hurt them. Now, I do see the side you're saying. Okay, so you bring The Undertaker in, you bring Shawn Michaels in, and they disappear, and then what do we have left? You think people are going to show up just to see, whoever else is on the card and these little known guys? So I see that side, but I also feel like, hey, if you've got that resource as a business owner, use that resource as much as you can to inject the shot of adrenaline into your promotion. So that's my take on the big names, and I didn't see as big of a problem with it as some do.
Well, part of it is how you put it, and part of it is also, we can look at the history now. And my thing was always major league and minor league. It wasn't so much that these are nobodies or anything like that. It was more that people want, and you see it today. People will go to the NFL games, but they don't go to minor league football games as much. And I know XFL and pandemic and all that, they can kind of take this aside, but they want, American culture wants the major league. And so when you act like the stars that come in, like The Undertaker or Shawn Michaels or Randy Savage, and that makes the show special, then they go away. What you're saying is the next show isn't special. And what makes it and what makes it special is the major league stars. And you've stopped telling your promotion, you stopped telling your fan base that you're the major league. Like, that's what you have to do. You need to like say or pretend that you're the major league until you become the major league. You're the major league. Like, our wrestling is better. Our wrestlers are tougher. They're bigger stars. They speak to you better than these people from New York or these people from Atlanta, and they're all corporate and they're talking to corporate, you know, whatever it is, how it is you distinguish them. And then if you look at what happened with Smoky Mountain Wrestling and with ECW, when they started playing that game with WCW and WWE, what happened to how their own fans saw the promotion, and what happened to, and more than that, what happened to their business? They went down, and then there was always something that would go on. Like, I always remember Taz getting beat in his first appearance, turning up on Monday Night Raw. ECW, their first time, and Taz and Tommy Dreamer getting punked out. Accidentally, on purpose, those things would happen in front of a bigger crowd, and then the promotion, the numbers would go down. And so the temptation is, and for a fan, yeah, you want to see, like, hell yeah, bring in Randy Savage. I want to see Randy Savage and Bruiser, you know, my friend Bruiser Bedlam. I want to see Bruiser Bedlam versus Randy Savage. Or I want to see, but it didn't work. It didn't work out that way. It would give them a small boost, but the hangover wasn't worth it. It sort of reminds me of, you know, as when you're a kid, you can drink, you know, and then go to work and you can do all that stuff. And then as you get older, it's like you have the 3 hours of fun, and it might take, I'm just talking personally, and it might take me 2 days or 3 days to get over it. So like, yeah. I don't, it's not worth it. It's not worth the, you know, it's not worth the short-term boost. And that's how business worked with that stuff. You know, I think that, you know, you can have that, if one promotion seems bigger and has more power than the other promotion, not seem bigger, but is bigger and has more power than the other promotion, and can kind of screw them like they will, then it hurts the smaller promotion in the end. And I think that stuff did in Smoky Mountain, and it very much did in ECW too. It was, you know, it wasn't quite, and even things like the Heavenly Bodies being so great in Smoky Mountain and such a great heel team, and then they go to the other television that everybody's watching, and they're lower mid card, and they're kind of made into a joke. Like that stuff hurts. Like, it wasn't like the old days of the territories where if a guy could draw money one place, then they wanted him in the other place at same place on the card to draw money and to be fresh there too. It wasn't, we're going to prove to you that, you know, we're going to prove to you that these are mid card or lower, or, you know, that kind of thing. And you weren't watching, you know, once, I'm trying to think, you know, once Ken Patera left the Carolinas and went to the AWA, most of the people in the Carolinas who were wrestling fans didn't see him, you know, weren't watching him in the AWA. And it would have been fine because they saw him, you know, be a top guy, and they might have seen him, you know, wrestle. A few of them might have seen him wrestle on WOR when he was wrestling Bob Backlund for the WWF. But you didn't, you know, you didn't see one guy be on top in your area and then be a mid card guy in another area that made your area look bad. And then that stuff happened with WWE and WCW and Smoky and ECW.
Your point about the Heavenly Bodies, actually, I agree with that one 100%, because you're right. You go up to the quote unquote big leagues, and then you're made a joke of a bit, and then you come back and it does kind of leave a stain. It's like, oh, so you weren't quite good enough to make it up in the big league, but now you're back here. So like and that's not a slight on Heavenly Bodies. I love them, but I see that side of it. I still feel like as a business owner, he was just using the resources of being able to get those names, and thus for
I
a
don't,
good price.
I don't disagree with that, and I think you're playing the cards that you have left,
Right.
But and you got to do something. But on the other hand, there's the risk reward. You need the reward. You're going to take more of the risk, and when the risk doesn't pay off like it didn't, you're going to be hurt that much faster. So it's sort of like it's gambling in that, like, okay, I'm losing, so I'll start doubling my bets. Well, that's not necessarily a good idea.
No, and that makes sense. And Bruce, just so you know, we had this discussion when Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, when we did those shows when they were in Smoky, and I had referenced like your feelings on this. So I was hoping we would have this discussion before you caught wind of it, and I didn't misquote you or anything. I'd never do that, but I was just thinking, like,
sound good. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. So like, and I hear your side of it, and it makes sense. The little league versus the big league, I get that. That makes a ton of sense. And but it sounds like you also can agree that you use the resources you have, and it is gambling. That's a good analogy. You're doubling down because you're like, I got to do something. I got to do something here to make my train keep going down the track. So
even at the end when he made that deal, I was trying to remember this because when you contacted me, when he made that deal to do, like, he had the advertisement, was it the werewolf wrestler or something?
You talking about the Wolfman?
The Wolfman, yeah, the Wolfman wrestler is like, I remember when and I would get those tapes, and I was like, I know things are bad, and like I know that, and I get why he's trying to. But you wouldn't do that if business was good, and also if it pays off, it can pay off, but the odds are it's not. You're going to gamble more now, and and it is, and it turned out to be what it looked like, which is like, what you do in the end game. Although one thing about Cornette and Smoky Mountain that I always have admired, particularly in the last 20 years, is just when he started realizing that it wasn't going to work, he didn't keep it going just to waste Rick Rubin's money, just to provide everybody with a job. And now we've seen professional wrestling, particularly, TNA, where it's never worked and it's wasted opportunity and money, and it hasn't adjusted to the marketplaces, and it's just and now there's a whole generation, I think, of wrestlers and fans too sometimes, but wrestlers and people who work in wrestling that don't care whether they draw a crowd or whether they draw money. They care how they are politically, so they can keep their job from and keep getting money from the one fan who keeps giving an enormous amount of money. And I'm not a person to use the word mark, but that one money mark thing, or the money mark family, has really done a lot of damage. And that's and like like Cornette, when he started figuring out it wasn't going to work in the long run, he changed. He learned something from it and stopped the business. And I liked Smoky Mountain a lot too. And I didn't want to see it be, Global Wrestling Federation on ESPN, where it had no chance of making money and it was a bad product, but it kept going on and on and on and on.
Yeah, he did exactly what you said. I mean, he got to the Thanksgiving Thunder Tour '95, and he just kind of looked at it and supposedly there was, I think Tracy Smothers had a contact that would fund it. This one had there were like a couple of different people that would continue to fund it. And Corny just was like, nope, we're done. This is it. And that was the end of it. Speaking of the end of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Bruce, we're actually in the last month. We've recorded all the episodes through episode 200, but we're in the last month right now of the promotion as you and I record this. The Wolfman, yes, it's just, oh God, terrible stuff. But there's somebody that I think just makes the promotion bad is Tommy Rich at the end too. your thoughts on Tommy Rich and Smoky Mountain Wrestling? I just think it's just God. Listening to him is like listening to an incoherent drunk try to cut promos. But it's just my personal opinion. Your thoughts on Tommy Rich at the end of Smoky Mountain, if you have any.
Tommy Rich is always is interesting to me in this sense. I grew up as a teenager and as a kid, and I still have this part of me, like, rock and roll guy, and then as a music guy. And so when you get into music, to me, like, you get into it when you're like 11 or 12, and there's a band that's like your introduction. And for me, this is how old I am, and actually I was younger than this, but anyway, but for me, it was the Monkees. Like, there's always that, always that boy band, that appeals to teenage girls and all that. And once you learn that, like, it's for this generation, it's not for your generation, it's okay. And like, you learn about music, and then you start picking out your taste and all that kind of thing. And Tommy Rich, if you're your age, or if you're, if you're anything younger than, I'd say 50, I guess, but you're not going to get Tommy Rich. But if you go on YouTube and watch and watch Georgia Championship Wrestling when it's in its peak, when it's in its heyday, which is like up to about 1982 or 83, which is about the time when Ric Flair and Bob Backlund have their face-off on television. Anything before that is really, the real heyday, when Georgia Championship Wrestling was like Monday Night Raw. They had their crew of wrestlers, and then they had wrestlers from all over the world that would come, because it was the highly rated show that was seen everywhere. Like shows are now. And so Tommy Rich was the babyface then. And he has a lot of fire. He's like the cool guy for girls. He's the cool guy for guys. He's, Country Boy Can't Survive. He had that Southern rock, Southern country, new country, Hank Williams Jr. thing. And he's a big deal. He's a big star. And, Terry Funk and Dory Funk are running their home territory their father built. And they bring in Tommy Rich, and they notice the crowd has changed. Like, the crowd is a lot bigger, and they're kids wrapping around the building, and they're not there to see Terry and Dory. They're there to see Tommy Rich from the Superstation. And that's when they realize, we got to get out of running a local promotion. We got to get out of running a regional promotion, because for these people watching cable television, Georgia Championship Wrestling, which is not anywhere near close to Texas, is, Mass Superstar, Mr. Wrestling 2, and Dusty Rhodes and Tommy Rich and Roddy Piper. Those are the stars. And so Tommy Rich is like this big, big star, and he really was a big, big star. And he wrestled main events against Harley Race, and had that week to win it, and that always made sense to me in a way it didn't make sense to other people. And he would wrestle Ric Flair and have these big matches and all that. But he was also a guy that, watching it, and I was his age at that time, and I'd been a rock and roll fan, so I knew that, like, drinking and drugging, I knew that it takes a toll. And you could look at Tommy Rich, and he looked young and full of energy and full of fire and all that stuff. And then as he stayed and wrestled, Buzz Sawyer endlessly, and you could tell something was wrong, he didn't have it. Like, he looked like the guy that ran the high school that didn't go off to college and didn't get a good job or didn't go in the military and kind of stayed around town. And he looked the same, but it showed in his face. He wasn't, appealing to the young girls anymore. It wasn't. And then, like, it was like that, when he goes into ECW, when he goes into Smoky Mountain, and he's just making his living on small wrestling shows and drinking and whatever else he was doing. And he was doing a ton of it. And, he took his share of bumps, and he took his share of stuff. And so he's real torn up. And you can, like, I know Cornette's like looking at him like, I can get him for this price. And maybe, and Southern fans will remember him, and maybe you can get something out of him. and and also maybe he'll get into shape and straighten up a little bit. And he didn't. Like I remember, I guess it was '89, when WCW and Jim Herd just dropped Ricky Steamboat, and Eddie Gilbert got him to hire Tommy Rich, but he got Tommy Rich to like start eating tuna and start get back into shape. And Tommy Rich came back, 'cause the last time you saw him in shape, and he came back in shape. And then having the big loud Tennessee accent didn't help if you were like this guy who who looked like drank a 12-pack every night. It was he was the boy band who grew up, and once the boy band, a lot of those guys, once they they're Leif Garrett or whoever they are, once they get past their stardom, there's not much left, and then they try to hold on to it. And he was like that. Like that was, he was the boy band star who stayed around too long and didn't take care of himself. And so by the end of, I remember watching that. It's like, I have an affection for Tommy Rich, but I also he's had a tough go round. And I don't, what happened with Ricky Morton, that's really cool and a miracle, but it's like, it's not the way everything, the wrestler is more the way some of that works for a lot of those guys.
Yeah, Tommy Rich was out of shape. His promos are not all that great. It's not good, but the whole end of Smoky is just not good in general. Right. So,
well, yeah, I mean, they're going out of business. I mean, it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
Cornette was burned out, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stuff, and it wasn't. It was. I think of that as a hell of a try, and a real try, and a hell of a try to preserve something that he thought you could put into places that weren't served by live wrestling troops. And it was like, but you still had to compete with the television. And that was, to me, the lesson is, you either got to look like the major league and treat your stars like they're big stars, even if they're not, or you've got no chance. And I think that, a lot of indie wrestling, and even like television wrestling, like Ring of Honor, a lot of these places have not, have not kept up with. And then, WWE making production, look, like there's nothing wrong with the way Cornette produced his wrestling. It was like it was a cheap way to produce it, but you could see all the wrestling and you could do all that stuff. But now you have, decades of people watching wrestling expecting all those lights and all those, and the pyro and whether they have it or not, and all that stuff. And then you have indie shows that try to do it half-assed or don't have it. So it's like, you can't, I don't know. It's tough. It's a lot tougher now, but it can be done. I mean, I think AEW is showing that you can, if you're willing to, if you're smart enough about building stars, and if you're willing to pay the amount and you're coming through it. I know there are people that don't agree with it, don't like it, but it's so far, it's until the pandemic, it was well on its way to being major league for a different audience, and that's what you've got to be.
No, you make a point about the production value of. I mean, the WWE has made it so enormous that if you don't even halfway try and you're a small organization, you look so third rate because of everything that they've made the production of it. So that's a good point. Bruce, I got one other thing, man. We've almost gone an hour now, so I was going to talk to you a little bit about 1988 NWA and '89, but I'll save it for this because I know you were so fond of the American Dream Dusty Rhodes' booking. I'm making a joke when I say that, but towards the end of '88, when Dusty gets spiked in the eye, and then as we know, he ends up leaving in '89. How were you feeling as far as, were you happy that, okay, we don't have to put up with the Dreams booking anymore? Because I think we've talked in the past and you just were like, oh my God, this is getting kind of stale. Or what were your overall feelings In that time period, they do the spike angle, and then Dusty's eventually gone. Turner obviously takes over, buys JCP. Overall, your thoughts as I ask you all that.
Yeah. Well, you had 86, 85 and 86 when Dusty's booking was on fire, when he was the top star. And he had the Four Horsemen to sell for him. He had Midnight Express to sell for him. He had the Rock and Roll Express to stand by him and the Road Warriors to stand by him. But he was the number one guy. And I was going with my friends to, Front Row Section D. We were going to the Greensboro Coliseum every single month and going to big shows. And then it turned in 87. People they were tired of the booking. They were tired of the heels getting beaten up and losing and keeping their titles by technicalities at every show. And particularly the same, using the same Dusty finish over and over and over again, where we sit there and go, here come, the referee would fall down and people would start looking toward the back. The whole audience would turn and look toward the back line. It was just amazing. But also, as heel fans, we were laughing. We'd laugh at the fans and go, well, he kicked his ass. He won. If he won, who's got the belt? We just do that to entertain ourselves, and they'd be mad as hell. But also, you'd be leaving the Coliseum and hearing this: these people ripped me off for the last time. I'm never coming back. And I would keep up with the I got to where I could guesstimate the attendance. Go to the same building all the time, same setup. You could, and you would hear what the attendance was. And I got to where I was pretty good at it. I was like, I could guess it within 400 or 500 every time. And part of being good at it was there was less people coming every month. It was going down. And so I didn't know I was getting an education, but I was getting it. And then you had the Four Horsemen. They were cool. They had the suits. They were talking about living life and getting the women. And you also had the Rock and Roll Express, where they sold that Rock and Roll Express fan club, and they had that huge poster, and they had him sing that song. They had Ricky Morton sing that song and all that. And it turned the male fans against baby faces. And then you had Dusty, who was gaining weight, who wasn't working as hard in the ring, who would do things like they do the chorus line, which was three major heels would jump into the ring, run at Dusty, run into his elbow. When Dusty would put up his elbow, fall down, Dusty would move his elbow just a little bit, and then Dusty would go sit on the second turnbuckle because he was out of gas just doing that. And it got old. It was like he had pushed himself so hard, you'd seen so much of him that people were turning on him. And, Midnight Rider angle, I'll never forget. I went to the television taping in Dorton Arena. They just started it. And I go, and Dusty comes out on a horse, and he's not the Midnight Rider. And it's like, what the hell happened? And it was big. And then he went in, then he did his promos in the locker room because he got booed so much. You had this babyface getting booed because it was clear. And Dusty was like Fritz von Erich or Dick the Bruiser or Vern Gagne, where he was going, and not even Vern Gagne, but Dick the Bruiser or the Sheik, where he was going to push himself no matter what. There were 100 people there, and the Crockett's lost everything. He was going to be the number one guy. He wasn't going to adjust. And you had Ric Flair, who needed to be the babyface, who needed to be the number one guy, and was the number one guy. And even now, people remember him as the number one guy, but he wasn't. He was the heel, the babyface. The Hulk Hogan was Dusty Rhodes, and so and Dusty was nasty about it. He thought he was entitled to all that, and so instead of stepping aside, you had 1988 where Dusty Rhodes is involved in every angle that the promotion is running. And everybody who comes out and does a promo talks about Dusty Rhodes.
Yep.
Whether they have their thing or not. And it's not working. It's one thing if he's Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania, if he's Stone Cold Steve Austin, at the height of that, okay, great. You're making a huge amount of money. If he's Dusty Rhodes in the 70s in Florida, but he ran out of the string there. If he's Dusty Rhodes in 85 and Jim Crockett Promotions nationwide, that's fine. But he burned it too fast. And so by 88, 89, and
Bruce, he would curse. He would not curse, but he would. There was a fat lady in the studio in 88. He would make fun of the lady on national TV. You fat lady, shut up, you fat lady. I'm gonna get you. Like, I've posted these promos on Twitter. It's amazing. So I just wanted to interject there as you're talking about that. Yeah, that's your baby face doing that to some fat woman in the audience.
Oh yeah, no, we get cussed by him. I mean, if you the $100,000 Tully Blanchard thing.
I remember.
Money, like they cut some of what he said. I mean, it was he thought he was entitled to it. He didn't always earn it, and so he was. We knew what was going on. Like I was talking to Dave Meltzer, and I was reading the Observer, and we were a good source for what was going on and Crockett. We weren't in the locker room with wrestlers or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, but we knew what was going on, and so my job sent me to West Virginia, and so I remember going, and I lived there for about a year and a half, and I was up there talking in 89 like every day about what was happening with Crockett, and they were losing money, and then knew they had to sell, and Dusty doubled down on himself instead of pushing Luger, instead of pushing Sting, instead of turning Ric Flair, or even using the guys in that came from the UWF, from Bill Watts' promotion, and freshening things up. Tully Blanchard had gone to the Crockett's and said, "Look, you got to do something about Dusty," and they kicked him off the plane. And all that, I was like, they got to do something with Rhodes. And then he was told that TBS was buying it, and it became Dusty versus Ric Flair. Dusty was trying to get rid of Ric Flair, and I knew that like before Starrcade, the deal was that that Dusty was going to have the match with the Road Warriors, but he was going to have Rick Steiner, be the guy who faces Ric Flair. He was going to make him the new babyface out of the Varsity Club, and he was going to beat him. He was going to beat Flair in 5 minutes. And the deal was he needed somebody that was tough enough to beat Ric Flair in 5 minutes. Rick Steiner was like, he wanted to just like squash him, and then Steiner would be the new star and work Flair out of the promotion too, and work Tully Blanchard out of there, and consolidate his power, because he and Flair were fighting, and Dusty had been taught, and he thought that like turning the Road Warriors heel and having them stab him in the eye and doing all that blood and this big angle on TBS, the angle would get so hot that TBS couldn't fire him, that he would be the big star and he would have the power. And even though they told him no blood, they told him not to do it. They told him, no, you're not going to be the booker when we take over and all that. He would get to keep all his power. And that was his gamble, and it didn't work. And that's why when you, so they did have the hot thing with Lex Luger and Flair. So, but when they went, and it was Ted Turner who said, "I want Ric Flair." Like, they wanted Ric Flair. If it was Ric Flair or Dusty, they wanted Ric Flair. And they told Ric Flair, like, they knew that he needed to like win some, and that he was going to be the babyface. They brought in Ricky Steamboat first, and they're bringing in Terry Funk. All that stuff was really smartly done, but the promotion was on its ass. It wasn't drawing, and so they told Flair, "We want you to beat Lex Luger, and we want you to beat him clean." And it was Flair who at Starrcade said no. He had to put whatever it was. He put his foot on his ropes or something. Like he gave Lex Luger an out. But if you look at Dusty and Sting versus the Warriors, it just wasn't it wasn't a big deal, because they knew like it didn't work, and it was already done that Dusty was already making the deal to go back to Florida and run a promotion with and try to revive Florida Championship Wrestling with Gordon Soley. and that didn't work either. Dusty pushed himself too hard, and people got sick of him. And he could talk, and it was all that stuff, but he couldn't perform. And then you can't have a 2-hour show where one person is featured all the time. Much of any kind of show, and that certainly was the case. That was the case then, and so it was a matter of but what I didn't see coming, and nobody could know, was Jim Herd, and was the idea that and was TBS, and even Eric Bischoff talking about it now. It's like TBS and corporations that don't, wrestling is this singular thing type of entertainment, and corporations don't understand it, and what they think is, oh, let's make it fun, let's do that funny stuff, let's do that, which is exactly what doesn't draw the money. And so that was the beginning of corporate wrestling, and corporate wrestling has not been good for professional wrestling at all.
Yeah, it was a double-edged sword in a way. I mean, like, I'm with you. Dusty just exhausted me by the end, but at the same time, and then him just making it worse by all the guys cutting promos talking about him when they come out, and then he's a quote unquote your top baby face is mocking fat fans in the audience in the studio and just making a joke of them. It's just that part, just like come on, man, it's not all about you.
Quintessential, like there was always this thing about wrestling that if you met the wrestlers, like I remember like years ago I'd hear this is before I met the wrestlers, and what you would hear was the bad guys were decent. It was the good guys that were pricks. And now I kind of understand why, because the good guys got driven crazy in certain ways, but Dusty was the epitome of that.
Yeah.
He had some mood swing issues and that kind of thing, but he was he could get nasty. I was like, and he's one of the best wrestlers, one of the best attractions I've ever seen, and when he was on and when he did stuff, I mean, he was great. But he was also like really selfish, and it really, I talked to the Crockett's about it at that Starcast, and it was they went with him too long. It was time for him to become as Vince McMahon would talk about Hulk Hogan, the Babe Ruth figure, and be the legend, and he wouldn't move to the side, and it was really. He had to beat Lex Luger. He had to beat every big star that came along. He had to team with them or beat them. He had to team up with the Road Warriors, and he had to beat Nikita Koloff at arm wrestling. He had to, it was like he had to be the guy every single time, and people got, and he had to show up the Rock and Roll Express. So like the crew got tired of it, fans got tired of it, and sometimes sometimes absence makes the heart grow fonder. A little goes a long way.
Oh, definitely. Have you ever heard the Tony Schiavone story? And I don't remember if this was the Bunkhouse Stampede 88 or which pay-per-view or event this was, but Tony Schiavone tells a story of Tully Blanchard being so angry with Dusty. He says something like, I wish Dusty would book himself against himself and fuck himself. Like he was so frustrated with the American Dream and the booking, I guess, at that point. And I think that was in 88. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That was around the time he got kicked off the plane and all that. Yeah. Like, that's a very good way to say it. And that sentiment was not just a Tully Blanchard sentiment. And it wasn't just a heel sentiment or a babyface sentiment. It was a lot of people, a lot of fans, and a lot of fans, and back then you didn't have this, now you have this, I'm a wrestling fan. It's my religion. It's my duty to watch a bad wrestling show on Monday nights every night. That kind, there's this brand loyalty, whatever you want to call it. Back then it was like people just quit. Like you pissed them off, they went to the movies. They went to something else. They just didn't. And so, there was a lot of fans that were like that too. And there was, and there were fans in the arena. It wasn't, it wasn't John Cena. Cena sucks. Let's go Cena. It was Dusty really does suck. And the promotion was built around the best wrestlers with the exception of Barry Windham, selling for the baby faces. And so you got that too. I mean, and it was Fantastics and Rock and Roll were, really good baby faces, but, and Ronnie Garvin was good too, but it was like, Dusty getting fatter and lazier and being able as an athlete to do just enough to like show somebody up. You got tired of it. It was like, you're getting cheat, and they were doing things like cheating time on shows and all this kind of stuff. It was like wasn't good. It wasn't good.
Yeah. I agree.
Like I look back on it now, and if they'd expanded in '86 and moved Dusty to the side, then maybe they would have had a better fight. I mean, I guess they would have lost in the end, but they gave WWF a hell of a run. They were the number 2, and it was always going to be one company or no companies left. And so when they needed to, they had the television stations, but they needed the cash to expand the business. They didn't have it. They were losing money because, 85 and 86, they were making, they were doing great business. And then they just, they went with it too long. And then also you got, now most matches are back to having clean finishes. And back then they never beat anybody, like the Crockett's never, Dusty didn't beat anybody. And that got to be old too. That got to be, what's the excuse to lose? And keep the belt on the guy that lost, and that got boring.
Well stated, Bruce. Bruce, one other question, and we can do this one real quick before I let you get out of here. We just it hasn't aired yet. It's going to air next Thursday night. We just reviewed the episode where Steamboat comes in January 21st, 1989, and we got into a discussion. My 2 co-hosts and I. The thing is, none of us were Observer readers, and nor were we Torch readers at the time, and I still haven't ever had a subscription to the Observer. Don't tell Meltzer that. Anyway, my question is, we were talking about it, and we were like, hey, it had to be commonly known. Like, we didn't know at the time when we were watching 89, but it had to be commonly known. Do you know if Dave had reported that, hey, Steamboat's coming in at that time? I'm sure he did, but I'm wondering if you know that.
It wasn't commonly known. I think he had.
Okay.
I think so. I'm trying to remember. Like I said, at that point I was talking to him a lot too. Yeah, I think it had, but it wasn't. But for me, as someone from the Carolinas in the '70s who became an obsessed real fan of professional wrestling because of those two, and thinking I'd never see them face each other again. And then for him to come back and do that, I mean, believe me, I was thrilled. Like, I was like, I was like, okay, I'm trying to remember if I knew that was the show or not. I think I might have, but if I did, it was only a day or two before or something, or I just read it. But, that was, Steamboat and Flair, and the biggest impact was in the '70s, not in the '80s. I know the people,
right.
The end of the '80s, I know, like, those are 3 legendary matches and they deserve it. And there's some other, legendary matches there. And but to me, they're the babyface and heel side of a great coin. And Flair I always thought was a great babyface too. Like, that was what really hooked me, but, them as a team, but it was, Steamboat. And that was a simple way to do it. It was, and just, you knew Flair was really happy because it was his favorite opponent, and God knows it should have been. So
it was a great, that episode, January 21st, was only 1 hour on TBS that Saturday night. So 45 minutes without commercials, but it's a very good episode. If you have the network, go watch it. Obviously, and we'll be reviewing it. It'll probably drop after this show drops, but yeah, it was good stuff. So, Bruce, anything you'd like to plug before you get out of here? I appreciate your time again, man. This was great.
I'm on Twitter at MitchellPWTorch and PWTorch.com and PWTorch.com/GoVIP. Bunch of podcasts. all kinds of things to read from the last 40 years and writing every week and all, just wrestling always changing and always staying interesting. So I hate empty arena wrestling. I don't think it works, but that day will pass too. So we'll see how stuff goes. And I was a fan of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I have my complete collection. I have a lot of respect for what was done then.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad. I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a while, and with it coming to a close, I'm glad we had this discussion. That way we can talk about the things we agree and disagree on. But this was good, and this is why you don't do these things over Twitter and argue with your friends and people you respect, because you won't get anything resolved. But this was real good, man. I appreciate that. And one other thing, you're talking about PW Torch VIP. Bruce has a lot of great history out there on that VIP feed. I've learned a lot from it, so I just want to mention that it's some really good stuff.
Really appreciate it.
You've done some hellified dives into lots of different things and things that I had no clue about, because I was a Mid-South guy, and now I guess you can consider me a Smoky Mountain guy as well. But there were things from Mid-Atlantic and other areas that I was just like, man, that's pretty awesome. So Bruce, and if you follow Bruce on Twitter, let me warn you, don't take everything he says literally. He's
No, don't. God, no. That drives I'm just like, have you ever heard of tongue in cheek? And sometimes it's like I try to say like the dumbest thing with the straightest face, and it's like, and thinking it's obvious. It's like, oh God, no, okay. But yeah, I mean, you're right. And there are things that that to me like they're too complicated to talk about on Twitter. Like sometimes Twitter to me is just like, smart aleck comment, smart aleck comment, smart aleck comment, and every once in a while like something kind of serious. But it's like, good night. Yeah, if you please don't take it all with.
But no, I appreciate it again, Bruce. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. This was a lot of fun. You'll have to come back again.
Yeah, cool deal. All right, yeah, let me know.